Los Angeles, 1947. A place where the American dream shimmered with neon lights and endless promises. Hollywood was booming, luring dreamers from across the country. But beneath the glamour, the city hid something darker. Crime, corruption, and secrets thrived in the shadows of palm trees and movie sets. Among the thousands chasing stardom was a young woman named Elizabeth Short. She was only 22, with porcelain skin, raven black hair, and a smile that could disarm anyone. To many, she was just another hopeful, drifting between Hollywood's casting calls and smoky nightclubs. But to the newspapers, she would soon become something else, the Black Dahlia. On January 15, 1947, a mother walking with her child stumbled across something horrifying in a vacant lot in South Los Angeles. At first glance, she thought she saw a broken mannequin, discarded carelessly. But as she got closer, the truth revealed itself. What lay before her wasn't a mannequin. It was the mutilated body of Elizabeth Short. The gruesome discovery would shake Los Angeles to its core. The police were called immediately, and within hours, the crime scene swarmed with officers, reporters, and the morbidly curious. But the brutality of what had been done to Elizabeth stunned even the most hardened detectives. Her body had been carefully cut in half at the waist, drained of blood, and positioned deliberately. Her face had been slashed into a grotesque smile, leaving her forever frozen in an expression that haunted those who saw her. The press seized on the story instantly. In a city that thrived on spectacle, the murder of a beautiful young woman was irresistible. They gave her a nickname that would outlive her, the Black Dahlia, a chilling twist on the film The Blue Dahlia, which was popular in theaters at the time. As the headlines screamed, Los Angeles became obsessed. Who was Elizabeth Short? Why was she murdered in such a horrific fashion? And perhaps most importantly, who could have committed such a calculated, sadistic act? The city's dreamers, hustlers, and predators all collided in the weeks that followed. Detectives were under immense pressure. The media fanned the flames. And Elizabeth Short's tragic life began to unravel in the public eye, as secrets from her past and rumors about her present were exposed. This was more than just a murder. It was a mirror held up to Hollywood itself, beautiful on the outside, but rotten at the core. And as police began digging deeper, they realized something chilling. The killer hadn't simply taken a life. They had staged a performance, one designed to shock, terrify, and perhaps even taunt the entire city. But what kind of person could be capable of something like this? Before she became the Black Dahlia, Elizabeth Short was just a girl from Medford, Massachusetts. Born in 1924, she grew up in a working-class family that was shattered when her father abandoned them during the Great Depression. That loss left scars that Elizabeth carried for the rest of her life. She was strikingly beautiful but fragile, often sick as a child due to lung problems. Doctors recommended she move somewhere warmer, and so, Elizabeth spent parts of her youth in Florida. That's where she developed her love for glamour, the beach lifestyle, and eventually, the allure of Hollywood. Friends described her as sweet, dreamy, but also restless. She wanted more than the small-town life she had known. She wanted the movies, the lights, the possibility of becoming someone unforgettable. Elizabeth drifted across the country in her teenage and early adult years, moving from Boston to Florida, and eventually to California. She dated servicemen, hoping perhaps to find stability, but nothing lasted. She was engaged once, but tragedy struck when her fiancé, a pilot, was killed in World War II. After that, Elizabeth seemed to chase something she couldn't quite grasp: security, love, and stardom all at once. In Hollywood, she earned a reputation. Some knew her as kind and charming. Others saw her as mysterious, even aloof. She was often dressed in black, her striking appearance making her stand out in smoky jazz clubs. But beneath the stylish exterior was a woman struggling to survive. She didn't have steady work. She relied on friends, boyfriends, and strangers to get by. The press would later twist these facts into something darker, painting Elizabeth as a femme fatale who lived a reckless life. But those who truly knew her insisted she wasn't what the headlines made her out to be. She wasn't a criminal. She wasn't dangerous. She was simply a young woman searching for belonging in a city that preyed on vulnerability. Still, as police dug into her life, one thing became clear. Elizabeth had secrets, and some of the men she crossed paths with might have wanted more from her than she could give. The question was, did one of those men turn into her executioner? The lot where Elizabeth's body was discovered was quickly transformed into a circus. Reporters swarmed, sketch artists captured the scene, and police struggled to keep order. This wasn't just another homicide. The precision of the cuts, the way the body was displayed, it suggested something far more sinister. The autopsy revealed horrifying details. Elizabeth had been tortured for hours before her death. The cuts were made with surgical precision, suggesting her killer had medical knowledge. Her body had been washed, making it difficult to find evidence. And the eerie smile carved into her face suggested the crime was meant to be symbolic, theatrical. Detectives began canvassing the area, but no one had seen anything. Whoever had placed the body there had done so in the early morning hours. The killer wanted her to be found in the daylight, shocking the world. Meanwhile, tips poured into the police station. Everyone claimed to know something. Some insisted they saw Elizabeth with shady men. Others suggested she had ties to Hollywood's underworld. Still more claimed the killer was a doctor, an actor, or even a policeman. The Lapt was overwhelmed. The public demanded answers, and the newspapers only made things worse. Headlines screamed, speculated, and sensationalized. The truth of Elizabeth's murder was already being buried under rumor and scandal. But then, the killer did something chilling. They reached out directly. And then came the most damning piece. Hodel had medical training, the skill necessary to perform the precise cuts found on Elizabeth's body. The Lapt bugged his house in 1950, hoping to catch him confessing. For weeks, they recorded his conversations. What they captured was chilling. At one point, Hodel was heard saying, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia. They can't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary anymore, because she's dead." It was as close to a confession as police would ever get. But despite this, Hodel was never charged. His powerful connections, the lack of direct physical evidence, and the chaotic state of the investigation meant he walked free. And so the question lingered. Had Los Angeles let the Black Dahlia's killer slip through its fingers? By now, the Black Dahlia case had gripped not just Los Angeles, but the entire country. Newspapers from coast to coast carried lurid details, often exaggerating or inventing new rumors to sell copies. Elizabeth Short was no longer just a victim. She was a character in a story the press couldn't resist spinning. They portrayed her alternately as an aspiring starlet, a tragic waif, and a dangerous femme fatale. Each version said more about society's fears and fantasies than about Elizabeth herself. Meanwhile, women in Los Angeles were terrified. The brutality of the crime suggested the killer could strike again, and some believed he already had. Other murders of young women in the area began to be linked, rightly or wrongly, to the same hand. Each discovery fueled the paranoia. Was Los Angeles harboring a serial killer? The Lapt insisted they were making progress, but behind closed doors, detectives were divided. Some believed the killer was someone in Hollywood's elite. Others thought it was a drifter, someone who slipped back into obscurity after the crime. But as weeks turned into months, one thing became clear. The Black Dahlia case was slipping further from resolution. Leads dried up. Suspects were eliminated. Witnesses changed their stories. And yet, just when it seemed the trail had gone cold, another bizarre piece of evidence surfaced, one that would reopen old questions and deepen the mystery. Years after Elizabeth's death, a photograph emerged that reignited the case. In it, a woman bore an uncanny resemblance to Elizabeth Short. The photo was found among the belongings of none other than George Hodel. For some, this was proof he had known Elizabeth personally. For others, it was just another strange coincidence in a case full of them. But what disturbed investigators wasn't just the resemblance, it was the context. The photo was artistic, almost staged, echoing the surrealist influences Hodel adored. If Hodel had been connected to Elizabeth, it gave weight to the theory that her murder had been more than just violence. It had been performance art, a grotesque statement. Detectives revisited the evidence. They re-examined the autopsy photos, the positioning of the body, the surgical precision. The more they looked, the more they saw echoes of Hodel's world, his medical skills, his obsession with art, his disturbing psychology. But once again, they lacked the final piece of proof. Without it, the case remained a haunting puzzle, just out of reach. Still, the photograph raised a terrifying possibility. If Hodel had staged Elizabeth's death as some kind of twisted masterpiece, what did that say about the mind behind the crime? And could there have been more victims we never knew about? The Black Dahlia case wasn't just about one woman's murder. It became a reflection of Hollywood itself. Elizabeth's story was twisted by the media to fit whatever narrative sold the most papers. She was painted as a cautionary tale, a victim of her own ambition, a symbol of the dangers lurking in the city of dreams. But beneath the sensationalism lay a harsher truth. Hollywood thrived on exploitation. Young women like Elizabeth were chewed up by a system that promised fame but often delivered heartbreak. The predators who roamed casting couches and nightclub backrooms were rarely exposed. Elizabeth's death forced the city to confront the darkness it usually kept hidden. The public wanted a monster to blame. But in reality, the monster was everywhere, in the power structures, in the corruption, in the way society consumed the story of Elizabeth Short as entertainment. The Black Dahlia was no longer just Elizabeth. She was Hollywood's darkest mirror, reflecting not just the cruelty of her killer, but the cruelty of a city that used her tragedy for spectacle. And yet, even as her name became legend, the truth of her murder remained elusive. For decades, detectives and amateur sleuths alike obsessed over the Black Dahlia case. Files were reopened. Evidence was re-examined. Theories were debated endlessly. Some investigators believed firmly in George Hodal's guilt. Others were convinced the killer was someone else entirely, a jealous lover, a stranger with medical training, even a policeman. Theories branched out endlessly, each with compelling details, each with frustrating gaps. The case became one of the most studied murders in American history. Books, films, and documentaries poured over every scrap of evidence, every rumor, every whisper. Yet the answer remained just out of reach. For the detectives who had first worked the case in 1947, the lack of closure was devastating. Many went to their graves believing they had failed Elizabeth Short. But in the shadows of their frustration, new voices began to rise. People who weren't satisfied with letting history bury the truth. And one of those voices came from within George Hodal's own family. Decades after the murder, Steve Hodal, the son of George Hodal, made a stunning claim. Steve wasn't just anyone. He was a former lapsed homicide detective himself. And he believed his father had been the Black Dahlia killer. Steve began his own investigation, poring over old case files, family records, and personal memories. What he found disturbed him deeply. His father's medical knowledge, his interest in surrealist art, his abusive nature, all aligned with the details of Elizabeth's murder. But Steve went further. He claimed that the Lapt had deliberately covered up his father's involvement because George Hodal was connected to powerful figures in Los Angeles. According to Steve, the police had evidence but chose to bury it to protect their own. His revelations reignited public fascination with the case. Some dismissed him as a son obsessed with vilifying his father. Others believed he had uncovered the truth that had been hidden for decades. But Steve wasn't finished. He claimed there was even more evidence tying George Hodal not only to the Black Dahlia but to other unsolved murders in Los Angeles. If true, then Elizabeth Short's killer hadn't just struck once. They may have walked among Hollywood's elite as a predator far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. Steve Hodal's investigation wasn't just based on speculation. Among the most disturbing pieces of evidence were the secret Lapt recordings made in 1950 when George Hodal's home was bugged. Those tapes, stored in police archives, revealed shocking conversations. George was heard making cryptic statements that sounded eerily like confessions. One recording captured him saying, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia. They can't prove it now." Another line referenced his secretary, who had conveniently died under mysterious circumstances. Detectives at the time believed she might have known too much. George's words suggested he had silenced her to protect himself. But despite the chilling implications, the tapes were buried in files and forgotten for decades. Why? Some argued it was incompetence. Others believed George's powerful connections shielded him. After all, he had friends in the Lapt, Hollywood, and the political elite. Steve Hodal believed the tapes were the smoking gun, proof that his father had not only killed Elizabeth Short but reveled in outsmarting the law. But if the tapes were that damning, why hadn't the Lapt acted? And what else might George have confessed, hidden away in recordings that had gathered dust for half a century? As Steve dug deeper, he began noticing disturbing parallels between the Black Dahlia case and other unsolved murders in Los Angeles. Women had been found mutilated, posed, or surgically cut in ways eerily similar to Elizabeth Short. Some cases had been dismissed as unrelated, while others had simply been forgotten. Steve argued that his father wasn't just the Black Dahlia killer, he was a serial killer. A predator who moved through Los Angeles society unnoticed, targeting vulnerable women, leaving behind staged crime scenes as his signature. Among the cases Steve linked to his father were the murders of Jean French in 1947 and Lillian Dominguez in 1949. Both victims showed signs of sadistic mutilation. Both murders bore similarities to Elizabeth's. If true, it meant the Black Dahlia was never an isolated tragedy. It was part of a chilling series of killings stretching across years, perhaps even decades. And the thought was unbearable. How many women had fallen victim to a man who lived among Hollywood's elite, hiding behind wealth and charm? Central to Steve's theory was his childhood home, the Hodel family residence on Franklin Avenue. The house itself was a striking, almost surrealist structure designed by architect Lloyd Wright, son of Frank Lloyd Wright. Its angular design, secretive rooms, and shadowy corners made it unsettling even in daylight. Steve believed that Elizabeth Short had been killed inside this house. He pointed to witness statements that placed her in George's orbit. He cited neighbors who recalled screams and suspicious activity. Even more chilling were cadaver dog searches conducted years later at the property. The dogs alerted to areas of the yard, suggesting human remains might once have been buried there. Soil analysis even indicated traces of human decomposition. For Steve, this was the missing piece. His father hadn't just killed Elizabeth. He had done it in the very home where Steve himself had grown up. The thought was horrifying. Had Steve lived in the shadow of a crime scene all along? George Hodel's fascination with surrealist art wasn't just a hobby. It may have been the inspiration for his crimes. Steve uncovered disturbing connections between Elizabeth's mutilation and the artwork of Man Ray, one of George's close friends. Man Ray's pieces often depicted women in fragmented, distorted forms, their bodies turned into objects of grotesque beauty. The resemblance between Elizabeth's posed body and some of Man Ray's artwork was uncanny. To Steve, it was no coincidence. He believed his father had staged Elizabeth's corpse as a twisted homage to surrealism, turning murder into art. The idea was horrifying but plausible. George had always seen himself as more than a doctor. He fancied himself an intellectual, an artist of life and death. If Elizabeth's murder was his masterpiece, it explained the theatricality of the crime scene. But it also raised a terrifying question. If George saw murder as art, how many works had he created that the world never recognized? If George Hodel was truly guilty, why wasn't he arrested? Why wasn't justice served? Steve's answer was simple: corruption. In the 1940s, the Lapt was rife with scandal. Officers were known to take bribes, bury evidence, and protect the city's elite. George, with his wealth and connections, may have been shielded from prosecution. Some detectives privately believed George was guilty, but without enough admissible evidence, their hands were tied. Others may have deliberately suppressed evidence to protect him. The result was devastating. Elizabeth's case, instead of being solved, was left open, manipulated, and eventually abandoned. The corruption didn't just fail Elizabeth, it may have allowed George to continue killing. And the weight of that failure still hangs over Los Angeles to this day. Even as the case grew cold, Elizabeth Short's name never faded. For decades, the Black Dahlia haunted Hollywood. Films, novels, and documentaries retold her story, each adding layers of myth and speculation. She became more than a victim. She became a symbol of Hollywood's darkest side. But with every retelling, the truth became harder to see. Elizabeth the woman disappeared beneath Elizabeth the legend. The real person, with her hopes and struggles, was overshadowed by the gruesome spectacle of her death. Steve Hodel's work sought to bring the truth back into focus. But even he admitted that proving his father's guilt beyond doubt might never be possible. The case had taken on a life of its own, a ghost story that refused to rest. And in the shadows of Hollywood, the name Black Dahlia still sent chills down spines. In recent years, modern forensic techniques have been applied to the case, offering glimmers of hope. DNA testing has been attempted on old evidence, though time and contamination have made results uncertain. Still, some believe that one day, science may solve what witnesses, detectives, and theories never could. But there's another layer to the Black Dahlia's story, its cultural echo. Elizabeth's murder shaped the way America thought about crime, celebrity, and media. It blurred the lines between victim and spectacle, between tragedy and entertainment. Every sensationalized headline, every exploitative article, was a reflection of how society consumes true crime. Her death became more than a case. It became a mirror held up to the public itself. And in that mirror, the question remains, do we want justice for Elizabeth, or do we just want the story? If George Hodel was truly the Black Dahlia killer, his story didn't end in Los Angeles. He eventually left the United States, traveling through Asia and living in the Philippines. Some believe he continued killing abroad, with unsolved cases in Manila bearing similarities to Elizabeth's murder. It's a chilling thought that the man who may have committed one of America's most infamous crimes walked freely across the world, untouched by justice. For Steve, the realization was personal. It wasn't just about Elizabeth Short anymore. It was about his father, his family, his own childhood. The man who raised him may have been one of the most dangerous predators of the 20th century. The weight of that truth was unbearable. But Steve refused to stay silent. He dedicated his life to proving his father's guilt, even if it meant carrying a burden no son should ever have to bear. More than 70 years have passed since Elizabeth Short was murdered, but the case refuses to fade. Every few years, new theories emerge, new suspects are named, new books are published. Each promises to solve the mystery. None ever do. Perhaps that's the tragedy of the Black Dahlia. The case is too old, the evidence too thin, the corruption too deep. The truth may forever remain hidden. But even without a verdict, the case has achieved a kind of immortality. It continues to fascinate, horrify, and inspire debate. And for Elizabeth, whose life was cut short, perhaps the only justice left is that we remember her not just as the Black Dahlia, but as a young woman who deserved so much more than the cruel fate she met. The Black Dahlia's story ends where it began, in Los Angeles, the city of dreams and nightmares. Elizabeth Short came to Hollywood searching for opportunity, for beauty, for love. What she found instead was exploitation, betrayal, and death. Her murder revealed the city's darkest truths, its corruption, its predators, its hunger for spectacle. And though her killer was never officially named, the shadows of men like George Hodel still hang over the case, a reminder that evil often hides in plain sight. For true crime lovers, the Black Dahlia remains the ultimate mystery. For historians, it is a case study in failure and obsession. But for Elizabeth's memory, it is something else, a call not to forget the human being at the heart of the legend. She was not just a victim, not just a headline, not just a gruesome photograph. She was Elizabeth Short, a daughter, a dreamer, a woman who wanted to live. And until her story finds peace, Hollywood's most infamous unsolved murder will never rest.